foreign ministers of NATO are meeting in Prague with military aid for Ukraine at the top of the agenda. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is among those gathered in the Czech capital as the U.S. faces increasing pressure from allies over restrictions that prevent Ukraine from striking targets with Western weapons inside Russia. Ahead of the meeting, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said it was time for NATO members to reconsider whether their weapons could be used to hit beyond Ukraine's borders.
I believe that the time has come to consider some of these restrictions to enable the Ukrainians to really defend themselves. Russia invaded another country, invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine has, according to international law, the right to defend themselves. It's enshrined in the UN Charter. And the right for self-defense includes also striking military targets, legitimate military targets outside Ukraine.
Well, our Brussels Bureau Chief Alexander Van Namen, she joins me now from Prague. Alexander, it's good to see you. We heard Jens Stoltenberg speaking there, so I'm wondering, is it just a matter of time before NATO changes its stance over weapons and how they can be used by Ukraine in the war against Russia?
Well, Brent, I think that the pressure is certainly growing on allies to agree on that. We heard from Jens Stoltenberg, and I think his position and the position of his staff at NATO headquarters is very clear on that Ukraine has every right to defend itself and that it also includes attacking legitimate military targets on the Russian territory. And we heard from Jens Stoltenberg quite a passionate plea. He argued that it cannot be that the Russian troops are sitting just across the border, so actually on the front lines, and they are launching their attacks from that point, from their military bases there, and Ukraine is not allowed to use Western-made long-range weapons to attack those positions. However, we also have to say that he is urging allies to reconsider the limitation restrictions, but NATO is not providing weapons to Ukraine. It is up to individual allies to decide what kind of weapons they are providing and whether there are any restrictions on the use of those weapons. And there are some members of the alliance, first and foremost, of course, the US and Germany, who are very skeptical when we talk about the usage of the Western-made weapons in Ukraine.
Yeah, we have heard that from the U.S. president, from the German chancellor, that we don't want to do anything that would escalate this conflict. So what about that risk? I mean, Russia has made it clear how it views arms that strike its territory.
As a total escalation, that is what the Kremlin is saying. The Kremlin is threatening the West that the conflict could escalate. And of course, there is a real risk for Germany, but also for other allies, especially for the US. They don't want to be dragged into a direct conflict with Russia. However, we also have to say that over the course of this war in the last 2 years, we have seen that individual allies change their strategy and kind of aid that they were willing to provide to Ukraine. We had the discussion about Western-made tanks. They were then provided to Ukraine. We had the discussion about whether it is okay to provide Ukraine with F-16 fighter jets. Now Ukrainian pilots are being trained on those fighter jets, and they will be provided to Ukraine. So we cannot rule out that the stance of some still skeptical allies with regard to the questions, what kind of attacks Ukraine can use the Western-made weapons for, that they also can change their stance on that question.
DW's Alexandra Van Namen with that beautiful skyline there of Prague behind you. Alexandra, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Tobias Bacherle is a member of the Bundestag's Foreign Affairs Committee for the Greens, which is a part of Germany's governing coalition government. Welcome to DW, Mr. Bacherle. Do you back the Secretary-General's call for NATO countries to allow Ukraine to use their weapons to hit targets in Russia?
Yes, good evening, and yes, I do. And I'm not alone with that. Last weekend in Sofia, the NATO PA, the Parliamentarian Assembly of the NATO met, and within their declaration, we stated, or within our declaration, we stated very clearly after Mr. Stoltenberg explained basically the current issues and the current situation to us as well. Very clearly within our declaration, it was stated that to support Ukraine in its international right to defend itself, we should lift some restrictions on the use of weapons provided by the NATO allies to strike legitimate targets in Russia. And as a member of NATO PA, I have to outline that this declaration was voted on with only one single vote against it of one single member of the PA. So, of course, I do support this current debate or the situation. What he's saying.
What then do you say to people who say that Germany would risk being drawn into a wider war in Ukraine under those circumstances?
We deliver weapons to Ukraine to defend themselves. And yes, we do that because we believe that Ukraine is not only fighting against an aggressor, but also for freedom and for European freedom as well. But the moment we deliver those weapons become Ukrainian weapons. And Ukraine is a state attacked by a foreign aggressor, and therefore, backed by international law, they are allowed to defend themselves. And defending themselves also means being able to strike military targets that are used to attack Ukraine. And I think
Can I just jump in there? Because the answer you've given me is pretty much the same one you gave me in your first answer. So just to go back to, let me just repeat the question for you, because people will say that Germany risks being drawn into a wider war in Ukraine if it allows German weapons to be used to strike Russian targets, which is not now the case. So what would be your response to them about why Germany should remove those restrictions?
Those are not German weapons anymore. We deliver them, we provide them, but they become Ukrainian weapons. It's important important to distinguish that within international law. And the other thing I really want to outline towards those people is to understand what's happening in Ukraine. And the videos and the horrific pictures we saw on the weekend from Kharkiv, where civilian infrastructure and civilian people were struck, and many people died, actually. I think those pictures outline what's actually at stake. And then you have the situation on the front line. And I know, and I'm very, very glad about the Czech initiative to gather ammunition. But the first of those ammunitions are going to be delivered in June, if everything goes well. There is a very dire situation on the front line. So there is a need to be able to defend themselves for Ukrainians in every way they can. And I think it's very important to understand this is not about...
And when Russia says it would regard the use of weapons provided by NATO countries to strike at its territory as an escalation, that's a risk you're happy to take?
This is not backed by international law. Russia is...
Well, that's kind of neither here nor there, is it? Invading other countries isn't backed by international law. This sounds like a risk that you are prepared to take.
There is a risk of Russia deciding to attack other countries just by deciding to do so. And drawing lines that Russia is thinking of now is just the same situation. It's a decision by Russia when they say now we want to attack a certain country. And they did that with Ukraine. And I am pretty sure they are currently focused on Ukraine. And therefore, I think our efforts must remain on supporting Ukraine as well. And of course, they can try to threat us. But we need to understand this war they're fighting there is a threat itself to the whole international community and to Europe especially. And this threat is ongoing. This is not a single point where this escalation is suddenly becoming a threat to Europe. This war is a threat to Europe. And we need to understand that. So drawing now another line from Russian perspective won't change that they already threatened us and that they're currently every single day threatening us with this aggression on Ukraine. And I take that very serious, but I do also understand we need to, support those who are fighting against it.
That's clear. Thank you for outlining your position so clearly. Thomas Bachherle of the Greens Party, thank you.
Thank you.